Praise be to Allah. Praise be to Allah, the guardian evolver of all systems of knowledge. We praise him. We seek his assistance. We ask him for forgiveness, and we put our faith in him, he that is almighty and perfect. We seek refuge with Allah from any harms coming from our own souls. And we seek refuge with Allah from any intentional bad deeds on our part. Whoever Allah guides, there's none who can lead them astray. And whoever Allah leaves wandering, there's none who can direct them to the correct path. We witness that there's no God except the one God, Allah. He has no partners in his rule of the heavens and the earth. And we witness that Muhammad, to whom the Quran was revealed, is his slave, servant, and messenger. And we pray that the praise and the peace be upon him, upon his family, the companions, the righteous, all, and what follows of that salute to Muhammad, the last prophet. So whenever we come together to give a presentation or to present the religion, the message that's given is a message of faith. It's always about faith. Every time, if it's in its correct focus. And faith directs us to the correct focus. If we open ourselves to faith in its purity. The enemy of man wants you to relax your disciplines, wants us to relax our disciplines. There is a reference in the Quran to the blowing on knots, how the enemy blows on knots. And this is pointing to our convictions. It's pointing to the whispering into the heart, or whispering into the sensitivities of people to loosen their convictions. This is the blowing on the knots. And this is one of the strategies of the enemy of man in order to achieve his purpose. So it's something that we have to be aware of. Influences can creep in from the culture, and they creep past our conscious guards that we have in our intellect. And there's sciences to this. This is not something that should just be taken lightly. This is not something that we should just dismiss casually as though it has no relevance. It's something that we need to consciously be aware of and guard ourselves against. The Super Bowl just happened recently, and people, advertisers, pay millions of dollars to get their commercials up and running while the Super Bowl is playing, because they know the influence, they know the ability that certain images and messages have to influence the subconscious mind, to influence our appetites. And they have developed a whole science, that the commercial world has developed kind of a science to create artificial appetites, that they'll throw signals at you to show you certain imagery that gives you appetites for things that you didn't have before you saw the advertisements or before you were reached by the influences that they put up there. And so one of the things about America and the freedom that exists in America is all of the competing influences coming from the commercial world. They pull you this way and pull you that way, pull you in every direction. Everybody's free to step into the commercial world and compete and put their influences out there. And so it really creates a toxic and confusing culture if you are in America without I kind of think of it like a scuba diving suit or a space suit. If you go out into the public and you breathe that air, you're breathing in toxins. You're breathing in all kinds of toxic stuff. And it will corrupt your life and it will take away from your life. I can't do that right now. It'll take away from your life if you don't have a protection, if you don't have a source of oxygen to breathe pure air. Then oh, you're going to be reached by the corrupt air. So this is why we say we seek refuge with Allah from our own souls. This is why we say we seek refuge with Allah from our own soul. It's not that the soul is inherently corrupt. Is that the soul, the life gets corrupted by a corrupt culture. And these influences creep past our subconscious mind. They creep past our defenses and they restructure or reorganize or rewire, reconfigure our sensitivities to move us in the direction that the life was not intended to go. Move us in the direction that supports somebody's purpose and somebody's agenda. So even when we read the Quran, the Islamic discipline that was taught by Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be on him, is that we begin reading the Quran by seeking refuge with Allah from Shaitan, the rejected enemy. Why do you have to seek refuge with Allah from Shaitan when you're reading Allah's words, and it's Allah's words directly? Because you read into the words the influences that are already in your mind. You read into the Quran, the influences that are already in your head, the notions that you already have accepted, the conclusions that you've already drawn, the influences from the culture, the disposition that you have, the orientation and the worldview that you have. You bring all of these with you when you open up the Quran to read. And if you don't seek refuge with Allah consciously as a discipline, then you may be reading the wrong things into the scripture and blocking yourself from the guidance. So the moral life requires discipline, and it requires a proper placement of emphasis. This is something that has been brought up many times. The proper placement of emphasis. When you change the emphasis, you can change the whole focus. One of the things that characterizes the leadership of Muhammad the Prophet is the clarity that he brought. There's a surah called Al-Bayyinah, the clarity. And there's many references in the Quran that point to this. What was different about Muhammad the Prophet as the one coming to conclude the line of prophethood, to conclude the revelation of revealed scripture, to conclude the picture for what human life is supposed to be as intended by God. One of the things that characterizes him as unique and different is the level of clarity that he brought. A lot of the prophets and messengers, they came addressing the private circumstances of their people. And they came in the context of a universal interest and a universal appeal, but their message was tailored to that specific people. It was tailored to that specific people to move them in a direction. So some of the things that may have been unique to them didn't apply necessarily to everybody else. For example, some of the laws that were instituted for the Jews were strict and rigid. They were more strict and rigid than what they needed to be, and that was the consequences of their own rebellion. And this is mentioned in the Quran. This is mentioned in the Quran that some of their laws are very limited, constricted, more rigid, more tight. And that's a punishment on them for their argumentative nature, the rebellious nature that they had. They were obligated with more rigid constraints as a result of their own dispositions. When guidance comes, guidance works to clear away the clouds of confusion. Guidance, true guidance, does not add on to the confusion. True guidance clears the confusion. So a lot of times when Islam is presented, it's presented in a way that's fantastic. I watched a video last night, part of it at least, and it was talking about some concepts in the religion, and it was so out there. It wasn't even in touch with like the reality of the scientific laws that we know. It was spooky. It was spooky. They went way out into like different heavens and different dimensions, and it was something else. When you present Islam in a way that's spooky, when you present Islam in a way that gives us a picture of the life or a picture of the guidance in such a way that it doesn't align with what our five senses register as the natural life around us, there's a separation that's created. There's an inherent confusion that goes along with that. There's a limit to the possibilities of the life because the life is not even reconciled. The life is not whole. The life is fragmented. It's fragmented and it's separated. So you have one part of your life that's reaching for what it recognizes as truth, and you have another part of your life that's reaching for what it recognizes as truth, and the two are at odds with each other. To teach people the religion in a way that causes that problem for them is to set them up to be somebody's slave. When the confusion is so great that you have trouble reconciling the picture of your whole life, how can you direct your life forward? You don't even have a picture of your whole life. You're stuck in the confusion of how you understand your life. So if you can't even understand what your life is and how it's supposed to be expressed, how can you determine where it's supposed to go, the direction that it's supposed to move in? You can't even determine where you're at right now. Confusion oftentimes is intentionally introduced into the picture so that corrupt people can have their way. Corrupt people can introduce their agenda and take the life in the direction that they want it to go. Take the life of the whole people in the direction that they want it to go. And this is also a significant reason why guidance came down, why Muhammad the Prophet was necessary. Muhammad the Prophet was necessary not just as someone coming to demonstrate how to be a good person. He didn't need revelation in order to demonstrate how to be a good person. He already had that. He was selected by Allah to receive revelation because of the good character that he already had. So just having the good character and having a good nature is not enough. And we know that. We're sensitized to that. Imam W.D. Muhammad has sensitized us to that. And he housed that sensitivity, he captured that sensitivity, he preserved that sensitivity in his dua. When he said, this life is too big for us to manage. This life is too big for us to manage for ourselves. Not without you, Allah. This life is too big for us to manage. There's so many moving parts. Just the natural world, the material world is so much bigger than us. But not just the material world in itself, not just inanimate objects. There are people who see themselves as bigger than what they actually are. There are people who are inflated. They have an inflated sense of entitlement. They're over entitled. They have a sense of over entitlement where they feel as though they're deserving of more than what other people are, and they will take from the possibility, they will take from the good future, they will take from the resources of other people in order to lift themselves up. And this is a movement that has been happening in the world. So those people who are innocent, those people who have a limited perception, those people who can't see too much further than their present circumstances and the life that they have, what's right in front of them, those people are ripe for the picking. Those people are ripe for exploitation. And if they don't have the perception, the broadness in their perception to be able to recognize what's happening to them by corrupt people who do have that perception, then they need Allah's intervention in their life. And we know from the teaching of Muhammad the Prophet, as it was given to us by Imam W.D. Muhammad, and as is being reasserted by Imam Earl Abdul Malik, that the life cannot be completed without the guidance of Allah. Your innocent nature is not enough. You need the guidance of Allah. Your innocent nature will get you so far on your own, but you need the guidance of Allah to complete the picture. You won't make it to the destiny without Allah. You can't do it on your own without Allah. You can't put yourself in, excuse me, you can't put yourself in the role of Allah and X Allah out of the picture. You can't do it on your own. So there's very important disciplines that we have to follow. And the most important of the disciplines, they correct and preserve the natural and innocent sensitivities that Allah created us to have. Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was given a platform to provide an alternative for what was developing under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Dr. Martin Luther King would not have had, he wasn't accepted when he first came out, and he wasn't popular when he first came out. He wasn't given a big major platform, except that the influence of Elijah Muhammad and what he was pointing people to was an alternative. And the people who were in charge, the people who have been in charge in this culture, in this nation, they didn't want Elijah Muhammad getting support for what he was presenting. And so they pulled the strings and pressed the buttons and did whatever they needed to do. And they allowed for Martin Luther King to have a platform and pointed people in the direction of his leadership. Okay. a lot of times, he passed away in 1968, and a lot of what has been preserved about Dr. King since his passing has been a watered down version of what he represented. What he pointed to in some respects was a watered down version of what people were sensitive to, that Elijah Muhammad was pointing to. He saw himself as a middleman. He saw himself as a middleman trying to be a buffer between two extremes. That's how he saw himself. But he was kind of a watered down version of what a lot of our people who were up from slavery were sensitive to. And a lot of the demands that we had, a lot of people saw him as a compromise, and what he presented to people as a compromise. But even beyond that, what he did stand for and what he did promote has been watered down, and he has been memorialized in such a way that continues that process. It promotes the watered down version of him, the I have a dream ideal, the fluffy, the airy, the ideal, the soft, the unthreatening, the unthreatening version, the version of him that sounds good, but it doesn't require that you make too many changes within yourself. They've put up statues. They have all kinds of memorials about him. They gave him a holiday, and even with all of that, they locked him into the memory. They locked him into the memory of the consciousness of the people. But they did it in such a way that they kind of left off much of the intensity that he was pushing for, if I can put it like that. I'm saying this because I want to kind of paint a picture. There is a propaganda technique that the commercial world uses. It's called transfer, where it's an emotional appeal, where they put before you something that people approve of, that they appreciate, that they have a certain level of emotional attachment to, and the emotional attachment that the people have to that thing, they put that in focus, and then they introduce something else right at the same time, and it's meant to transfer your emotional attachment and emotional value that you have for that one thing, and to transfer that emotions to the other thing that they introduced. It's a sneaky tactic, but it's something that they do. It's part of the science that they have. It's kind of a science of manipulation, and it's geared towards going past the defenses of your conscious mind to influence you without you realizing that you're being influenced in such a way. And people do that with Dr. King. They do that with Dr. King and his legacy. But they also, there's people who are also doing that with Imam W.D. Muhammad. They watered down his legacy. This is how I saw it put. The legacy. There's a lot of people who are talking about the legacy of Imam W.D. Muhammad. I looked up the definition of legacy. It says, the dictionary says, the long-lasting impact of particular events, actions, etc., that took place in the past. And the more I thought about it, the more I think about it, it makes sense that so many people, they're promoting the legacy of Imam W.D. Muhammad, because in their minds and in their disposition, the influence of Imam W.D. Muhammad is something that's in the past. We don't we haven't been putting this super high, super strong emphasis on the legacy of Imam W.D. Muhammad. We don't see him as something that's in our past. The focus on the placement of emphasis, to place the emphasis on the legacy of Imam W.D. Muhammad and remembering Imam W.D. Muhammad, it kind of subtly suggests the notion that there's a belief that his leadership is not to be succeeded. So this is something that's ongoing. This influence is out there. This influence is out there. And we who do accept that the Imam W.D. Muhammad's leadership is succeeded, we who do accept that his leadership continues, we who do accept that it's not over, it's not finished, it hasn't stopped, it's still going. These are influences that we have to be careful. We have to be disciplined in our thinking, and we have to be disciplined in our sensitivities to not allow that influence that's in the air to come in and corrupt the picture that we have and that we're working for. There's a lot of people who they copy Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. They study him, they duplicate, or they try at least to duplicate some of the things that he's doing. They put on events at the same time when he has his events, and they're introducing clouds of confusion. They're not introducing things that support this leadership that we stand for. They're introducing things that go against that. They're introducing things that cloud that. And one of the most insidious influences that I think we have to watch out for is this notion that how do I say it? This notion that, well, essentially what it boils down to is the notion that we don't need leadership, that we can follow our own, that we can have our own mind, and we don't necessarily need to follow any particular leadership. So here you have a lot of people with no vision. They can hardly see past what's right in front of them. In the context of the greater picture of the life that Allah intended, there's people whose vision is so narrow that they can hardly see past what's in front of them. And they're rejecting leadership. They're rejecting leadership because they were convinced to go with their own mind and their own thinking. And the people who have convinced them to reject leadership understand how limited their mind and their thinking is. And like I said, when you introduce conflicts into people's world, into people's reality, into people's perception, that puts them in that space, you set them up to be somebody else's slave. And so we have the situation in our history where influences outside of our community, influences outside of our people, have introduced these concepts and these ideas and notions that sabotage the works that we have put into place and that we lend our energies to establish. But it also has gotten to a place where now there's people who come from the same background, the same history, the same the same terrible circumstances in our psyche, and they're introducing the same things that outside enemies have done before. And which this takes my thinking back to what Professor Shabazz said about there not being any successful slave rebellions on the continental United States, ever. something about what was done to us in these United States has sabotaged us to such a degree that even when the enemy outside is no longer blocking our path, the enemy amongst us is still blocking our path. And this is a very real phenomenon that's happening. It's a very real thing that exists. And this what I'm describing, what has happened within the community that identifies with Imam W.D. Muhammad. This situation is what emphasized the need for Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad to step into the leadership, to accept the leadership, and to embrace it, and to put himself in that role. We are a community of faith, and I started out saying that the message of Islam is always the message of faith. And our faith is first in the oneness of God. And our faith in the oneness of God invites our mind to accept the oneness of humanity, the oneness of creation, and the oneness of humanity. And in accepting the oneness of humanity, we accept a singular picture for the life. And the disciplines that we exercise, the disciplines that we are to exercise, preserve our place and our role within the singular picture of the human family. We have insight, we have guidance that clarifies for us what the direction is for the life. It's not enough to just be good people. It's not enough to just live your life as a good, well, let me correct that. There are some obligations that are on the community at large. And if there are people within the community that step up and manage and handle those obligations, then everybody else is relieved. So it's not an individual responsibility for every single person, but it's a responsibility for the community. And to the degree that it's not being handled, that obligation does fall on everybody else. But if it's taken care of, then everybody else is relieved of that. And so certain expressions of the life have to be accounted for. When we take a step back and look visually, look with our eyes, when we take a step back and look at the picture of Muslim life around the world, there's a couple things that immediately stand out and give us a specific identity, a clear identity. We have the Salat, we have the Hajj. Those things very easily distinguish us. And our Salat, we face in the direction of the house, the Kaaba in Mecca. There are rules in place that say that non-Muslims are not allowed in the sacred precincts. Non-Muslims are not allowed, in Mecca, around the Kaaba. I was asked a question recently about how in the Quran it says that we're not to take Christians and Jews as our friends. And I was asked for clarity about that. And the word friend in that context was, in Arabic, is wali. And wali is somebody who is a protecting friend, someone who understands your sensitivities, someone who understands what's good for you and what's bad for you, and someone that can be trusted to guard your interests, even in your absence, even if they're working beyond your scope and your view. You can trust that whatever they're doing has your interest and is not sabotaging you or setting you up for failure. And it's a natural sensitivity to not allow people who have different sensitivities and different priorities than you to be guardians over your interests. If people have different interests and sensitivities than you do, and they're working to establish a picture for the life that's different than the picture that you have in mind for your life, why would you put them over your interests? You shouldn't put them over your interests. You shouldn't let them guard and direct your affairs. You shouldn't let them manage your affairs and edify the picture of your life, because they're going to do it in a way that doesn't agree with your sensitivities. So a protecting friend, a wali, is somebody who guards you and protects you in that way. And along that same vein, this is why people who are not Muslim, who don't have these sensitivities, are not allowed in the sacred precincts. What we stand for is not up for negotiation. What we stand for is not up for debate. And if your interest is to come in and debate or negotiate or to compromise or to kind of change the picture in some kind of way, or to make space for yourself when what you bring is something different, that's not allowed. That's not allowed. So people with different sensitivities are not allowed in the sacred space of our life. This is why you might see if the wrong influence come and reach even into this class, you'll see the imam draw his sword, right? Because we have to have the discipline to protect and preserve the life in its purity. And some things they require a lot of courage. They require non-compromising energy. They require people to stand up and listen, when certain circumstances are presented, it's time to go to war. If the life is not threatened, then, and people are not imposing upon us, we can negotiate our terms. Religion should be free for Allah. Religion should be free. Expression should be free, and people should be allowed to build whatever they see is fit. But when what you're doing is imposing or introducing corruption or trying to introduce weakness into what is at the core of our life, you set yourself up as an enemy that needs to be dealt with. So when we work to establish the life, and when we work to present the life, when we work to broadcast the life, we can't do it in a way, or we shouldn't do it in a way that is naive and short-sighted. But we have to be able to we have to be able to have insight and understand the dynamics that are at play, understand the forces that are in opposition, and understand the strategies that are needed in order to have a success for us. in order to have success in the way of establishing the life for us. And if we don't have the broadness in our insight or the broadness in our perspective to be able to see for ourselves clearly what these dynamics are and how to approach these dynamics, that highlights for us even more the necessity to stick closely with leadership. And that's what we have. That's what we have. That's what we're given on a regular basis. That's what we always come back to in this class. And when we go, when the Imam has events and different engagements around the country, this is what it's about. And so if we stick with this leadership, we stick with the sensitivities that validate the legitimacy of this leadership, and we stand upon courage and conviction, and we're willing to make sacrifices and not allow anybody to introduce weakness and confusion into the life, then we're going to have this success. Qad aflaha al-mu'minun. Certainly the believers will be successful. And so with that, I close my comments and I will open up the floor for, or I will bring before you Imam Ibrahim El-Amin. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.